Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the National Allied Golf Association's Media Conference. My name is Jeff Calderwood, Chair of NAGA and CEO of the National Golf Course Owners Association Canada. I'm joined here in the Charles Lynch Media Room at Parliament Hill by fellow NAGA partners Gary Bernard, CEO of the PGA of Canada, Ken Cousineau, Executive Director of the Canadian Golf Superintendents Association, Scott Simmons, CEO of Golf Canada, as well as Michael Curry, President of Strategic Networks Group. In addition, Elizabeth DiChiara, Executive Director of the Canadian Society of Club Managers, and Keith Kendall, Executive Director of the Canadian Golf Industry Association, are conferencing into this session, along with many members of the media. Thank you all for your participation today. The purposes of today's media conference are to release the 2014 Economic Impact of Golf in Canada, and to comment on today's Golf Awareness Day here at Parliament. My opening remarks will be followed by Michael Curry elaborating on the scope and methodology of the Economic Impact Study, and then I'll comment further on some of the highlights of the study and the relevance to our meetings with members of Parliament here today. At that point, we'll open the floor to questions from the media and on the phone. All NAGA partners are also available for individual interviews. I think the starting point for today's discussion should be that this new economic impact study confirms once again that golf remains the #1 participation sport in Canada, and that Canada's golf participation rate is #1 of all countries in the world, and that our financial impact is also number one among all sports in Canada. In addition, golf provides healthy outdoor recreation, tremendous life skills for our youth, a game that can be enjoyed by all ages, male or female, and all abilities. It can be used for multiple benefits, including competitive golf, social golf, corporate golf, and charitable fundraising. Golf also preserves 175,000 hectares of managed green space, the most environmentally friendly development of land there is, and golf develops heroes such as Laurie Kane, Mike Weir, and Graham Dillette, to name just a few who have evoked national pride and the characteristics of great Canadian role models. And indeed, we look forward now to that Canadian pride as golf enters the 2016 Olympics. So golf is both a great game and a vital industry here in Canada. We do have a great story to tell, quantified now by this new economic impact study, and we look forward to discussing the virtues of Canada's #1 sport with members of Parliament here today. At this time, I'd like to invite Michael Curry to the podium to introduce the 2014 Economic Impact of Golf in Canada.
Thank you, Jeff. We're honored to work with NAGA once again on this important research. This is a comprehensive update to the first ever nationwide study of golf in Canada, which we conducted in 2009 for NAGA. In terms of methodology, this study quantifies the economic contribution of golf in Canada by collecting first-hand information from the supply and demand side of the industry. We collected data from nearly 15,000 golfers and more than 400 operators from across Canada. The significance of that is that this is about 15 times what a typical study would collect in terms of data, which gives us a robust data set, allowing us to do some granular analysis and with a high level of confidence. Here's an overview of the methodology we used. We used multiple lines of evidence, both golf supply and demand, a web-based questionnaire for operators and golfers. We had detailed interviews with operators, 10 to 15, and we did comparisons with other sectors and other studies. We then used an input-output analysis, a model, an interprovincial input-output model that has been uniquely set up for golf in Canada. The operator survey was accessed by 421 individual golf operators, giving us a plus-minus of 4.6, 19 times out of 20. For the golfer survey, was accessed by 14,483 golfers, giving us a confidence of plus-minus 0.98%, 19 times out of 20. The study, the results and impacts were Canada-wide as well as provincials, as we did in 2009. And since the study was last conducted in 2009, there has been an economic downturn, the Great Recession as it's called, and the levels have returned to pre-recession. So in terms of the impacts, we reported on, in terms of GDP, on jobs, direct and indirect taxes. We compared to 2009 and also provided data on charity, land under management, and so forth. So I'm going to hand it back to Jeff now to give you some of the highlights.
Thanks, Michael. Now looking at some of the top-level findings in the study. There are 5.7 million golfers playing at a little over 2,300 golf courses in Canada. That golf generates over $36 billion in gross production into the Canadian economy. Gross domestic product itself has increased to $14.3 billion. Employment created totals over 300,000, including 126,000 that are directly in the golf industry. We generate $8.3 billion in household income. Charity fundraising in Canadian golf for 2013 was an impressive $533 million. $2.7 million in tourism spending within Canada, which does not include all the out-of-country travel that's beyond the scope of this focus on Canadian impact. $3.6 billion in total tax revenue to all levels of government combined. Provincially, Ontario accounts for approximately 38% of golf's economic impact, Quebec 17%, Alberta 16%, BC 15%, followed by the smaller provinces. Golf is certainly well represented in every region of the country, a very diverse and accessible recreational sport. The study also notes the considerable strength of golf as a financial driver of many related industries. The leading beneficiaries of those spin-off effects are real estate, retail, manufacturing, and the hospitality sectors. In summary, golf's economic impact in Canada is greater than all participation sports combined and greater than all performing arts and spectator sports combined, including the NHL in Canada. So how does all this relate then to our Golf Awareness Day here at Parliament today? We want to establish that golf is not only a great game, but also a vital industry to Canada. And although our financial impact is huge, it is important to note that this is an aggregation of many small entities, not big corporate Canada. This small business message is an important foundation for the rest of our discussion with MPs today. So, when our small business community encounters a blatant unfairness in government legislation, it is critical that we speak up as an industry. Current federal tax legislation imposes a major competitive disadvantage on the golf industry. All competing industries qualify for the appropriate 50% deduction on business expenses incurred when entertaining clients. Even though the famous expression, there's more business done on the golf course than in the boardroom, is drawn from the reality that golf is actually the most valuable experience for building client relations, golf-related client expenses in Canada are not eligible. Of course, that expression originates from the States, where golf has always been treated equally by the IRS, which is yet one more indication of how unfair Canada's Income Tax Act is regarding client golf. Some business people are avoiding golf, preferring to take clients to sports events, concert tickets, restaurants, skiing, tennis, theater, and numerous other activities instead, solely on the basis of these tax implications. This outdated legislation is simply unfair and does not allow our golf industry to compete on a level playing field, an unfairness that we can no longer sustain and no other industry would ever be expected to tolerate. So our National Allied Golf Associations are strongly recommending that the Department of Finance amend Section 1811 of the Income Tax Act to allow business people entertaining clients the 50% deduction on golf expenses, excluding memberships. This correction will then permit fair competition and allow Canada's most popular participation sport to properly serve the needs of the business community who really do want to capitalize on the effectiveness of golf for building client sales. Golf is an industry that plays by the rules, gives generously to the community, contributes over $36 billion a year in total gross productions, demonstrates environmental stewardship, provides healthy recreation as a sport of an entire lifetime, and should be the most effective business tool for client relations. We represent a large collection of small businesses who clearly deserve to be treated fairly. NAGA is now calling on all members of Parliament and Prime Minister Harper's government to correct this unfair tax treatment of the golf industry and our business clientele. We're proud to represent Canada's most popular participation sport and look forward to working with all parties to ensure the sport of choice of 5.7 million Canadians and our small business community providing the infrastructure to sustain it are being treated fairly. On behalf of all of us in the Canadian golf industry, thank you for your attention to our 2014 Economic Impact Study and this important tax issue that we're addressing during today's Golf Awareness Day. We'll now take questions from the media, and we'll begin with any immediately from in the room and then go to the phones.
Paul Vieira from the Wall Street Journal. When you brought this, I do recall you trying this in 2011 or just during the start of the crisis, the economic crisis, and then a few years later you tried this, and the former finance minister basically said this was not a priority and nothing's going to change. Why is it going to be any different this time? And are you trying to take advantage now of the improved fiscal outlook for the federal government and the fact that they appear to be headed to balance, probably maybe ahead of schedule?
You've partially answered the question that you've asked. So why now? First of all, this is a process. We've been working for a few years, as you noted, to build, and the momentum we're gaining every time we have meetings with members of Parliament gets us closer to that. Secondly, you're totally correct in terms of Department of Finance's balanced budget, surplus budget this year. That's one of the things that Minister Flaherty had said to us, was that's very difficult for him to address, along with a lot of other requests, until the focus on balancing the budget is achieved. So that makes this the critical point that we have been building towards. And I would just adjust somewhat what you said about Mr. Flaherty not being supportive, as I don't believe that's the case. He did not want to proceed with it at that time, but did recognize the unfairness, does want to be supportive of small business. We believe Minister Oliver follows that through, and it's more about timing and just working through the process than him saying no when we began the process.
Two-part follow-up. Have you had any indication from Finance and Mr. Oliver that they're willing to address this loophole or this tax measure which was brought in decades ago and you claim is unfair? Second, I recall that you did have bipartisan support. In fact, there were MPs from all three parties that were backing your efforts a few years back. Do you still have support from all three parties?
We'll start with the second part. Yes, we do have support from all parties. Yes, there was actually Randall Garrison, NDP minister from Vancouver Island, put forward a private members bill that you're referring to as an indicator of that support. We are very cognizant of needing all parties to be behind this, and we do not have any of those parties that are opposing the fairness of this. You repeat the first part of your question just to...
Do you have any indication from the new finance minister or finance officials that they're open now to addressing this measure which you claim is blatantly unfair?
Yes. We do have indications that this is on their radar screen and that now is the appropriate time to address it. So it's getting full consideration for sure. Today is really the start of resetting part of that process that relates directly to Minister Oliver due to his, relatively new position. So indirectly, there's a little bit of a restart to bridge the gap, but Department of Finance generally has been giving us the indication that they recognize this need and are giving it full consideration.
Do you have any indication what the fiscal impact of this measure would be on the Treasury?
The fiscal impact to the Treasury of a 50% deduction is in the $20 million range, which we describe as more or less revenue neutral. It is a fairly small number in their close to $300 billion budget. But in our world, where we deal with the gross dollars of increased corporate demand, it could easily double the corporate play, which could add another $300 million of corporate client entertaining golf played in Canada. In our world, which is a small business world, and we're dealing at those gross dollars, it's a very big impact. Department of Finance's world, it's very small, and it could even be zero if we did increase corporate play substantially. It's actually driving new tax revenues and a lot of spin-offs, extra employment, things like that you'd note in the economic impact study.
You threw out some numbers. You called $19 billion in direct spending, $14 billion account impact on GDP, and then you mentioned a $36 billion or a number in the $30 billion. So I'm
clarification.
Yeah, I'm trying to get what you mean by this 14.3 billion impact of GDP. You're not saying that, because that would work out roughly to 1% of GDP, which I'm not sure is what you mean. But maybe if you can clarify what you mean by the 14.3 billion.
Right. We have Tom McGuire on the line. He was the project lead on this research, and he's fully versed in the numbers. Tom, are you online? Okay. I couldn't dial in.
It's muted at the moment.
Oh, it's muted. Okay,
we
carry
come
on.
back to that.
I'll come back later.
Yeah. Essentially, what we did was, in terms of collecting the data from the supply side, the operators, what have they been doing, what's the real estate and all that management and other things that they're purchasing and so forth from the golfer side. And with that, we can put together, here's all the expenditures, direct, and then the indirect and induced effects, which we then quantify to get to the 19.7. But Tom will have a little more detail on those numbers. Thanks.
And the gross domestic product is not far off that 1% number. It is a bigger economic engine than people realize. That's part of the messaging. Any additional questions from the floor before we unmute the phone? We'll go there.
Operator, can you hear me?
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we will now begin the telephone question and answer session. Should you have a question, please press the star followed by the 1 on your touch-tone phone. You will hear a 3-tone prompt acknowledging your request, and your questions will be polled in the order they are received. Should you then wish to decline from the polling process for whatever reason, please press star followed by the 2. If you're using a speakerphone, please lift the handset before pressing any keys. One moment, please, for your first question. Your first question comes from Ian Hutchinson from Golf News Now. Please go ahead.
Hi, Jeff. You seem to be zeroing in a lot on the small business aspect of golf and how important that is to your message today. Is that fair to say that's a big part of the message you're trying to get across?
Absolutely, Ian. Although we're stating some big numbers collectively, it comes from entirely a small business community. If you look at the golf courses themselves across the country, the 2,300 and some, every one of them is a small business. They're averaging $1.5 million gross revenue in a seasonal, weather pattern. If you look at the suppliers, other components such as that of this economic impact study, again, it's a small business-driven economy, but there's so many that it adds up collectively to substantial numbers that have a big impact on the Canadian economy. And I think the small business component of that, Ian, is the unfairness, I think, is a little more sensitive when you're talking small business. And back to the question about do all parties support, that was one of the key drivers for the support of the NDP, for example. They like the small business support more so than the bigger corporate, and that's a good part of our solution here.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff. Going into today, it would seem that there's almost a three-dimensional aspect to the message you're getting across. And I mean, number one is actually the unfairness of it, which we've talked about. Number two is just a political climate about giving tax breaks, for lack of a better term. And number three is golf's own image, the way it's seen by people as being a wealthy man's sport. And I'm wondering, is it, I think in your first go around here, you faced that, and I think we've talked about that in the past. How difficult is it? Has it changed at all? What's the overall read that you have on all of that?
I do think what has made it difficult for the Department of Finance to quickly act on this is the political sensitivity. I do think they believe totally in the right and the wrong and the fairness issue. And I do think part of our messaging, to your point, is to communicate that perhaps golf once upon a time came from an elitist environment, but it has really evolved in the last several decades to the point where it is arguably the most diverse sport out there. The average green fee across Canada, if you combine the high-end golf course with the more modest ones, is in the range of $42. And I would put that up against your cost for a Maple Leafs ticket, your lunch at High Steakhouse, your National Arts Centre theater ticket across the street here, and any of those other things that don't get accused of being elitist. So I think we've got the right explanation. It is a sport. You can play golf for $1 a hole in any of the major markets around the country if that's what you're looking for. It's our job to communicate that, and we find that the MPs are welcoming that but do not understand it. They tend to default to the starting position of it's either just a game, not a business. We cure that, and that it's still a little more elitist than is the truth. So we get received well when we clarify it, but it's part of our task for sure to make those statements.
Yeah. So is it as much a PR campaign as it is an information session, Jeff?
It is a combination of that. I find PR a bit of a thin, superficial term to use, but I know what you mean. We do have to generate the publicity and correct some misconceptions to get it done.
Right. Okay. One last question. Election coming up next year. What's the timeline on this? Are you expecting this before the election? I mean, obviously you want to get it done before then because it seems like the government's open to it. But what effect will next year's election play on this?
Our target is next spring's federal budget, February, March, April timing, to be announced. So that connects across to the appropriate timing, I think, in their election cycle. It also connects to them with their surplus budget and the rest of the momentum that we've commented on earlier. So that's our target timing, and that's when we do expect to have the correction made.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff.
Okay, operator, any more questions? Quickly, we have 9 minutes.
Yes, our next question comes from Chris Sorensen from Maclean's. Please go ahead.
Hi there. I was wondering if you could direct me to, I'm having trouble finding a figure for what percentage or what dollar value corporate play currently accounts for. Is that in there?
I won't actually read that in the economic impact study, but there is another study. I can summarize that for you. $293 million of client entertaining is currently the best number we have for what's existing despite the 0% deductibility at the moment, which is a big enough number to confirm the fact that they're taking their clients there even though they have the disadvantage of the 0 when they deserve the 50% and could go down the street to an NHL game or any other of the alternatives. That confirms how important it is to business that they will use it to a certain extent even at 0. And we do hope that could double. The demand from client entertainment golf could double when it becomes 50%, meaning $600 million range.
Is there also a figure for the number of rounds played that sort of corporate entertaining would account for? I'm curious why you wouldn't include that question in your survey data, as it seems to be pretty core to what you're asking for.
Well, the economic impact study was done independently of this particular issue. It's just one thing that we'd use an economic impact study for.
Okay.
The answer to the first part of your question, yes, I don't have it with me, but there would be a corresponding number of rounds that relates to that $293 million. We could get that to you later, but that's not here in our notes today.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Our next question comes from Rick Young from ScoreGolf.com. Please go ahead.
Hey, good morning, guys. Jeff, I'll throw this to you or to anyone who wants to answer. Simple question. Do you believe that the government of this country respects the game of golf as an industry?
I do. I don't think they understand it well enough yet to fully respect it as much as they should, and that's a big part of our message.
Any follow-up from anyone on the panel about that?
I'm getting nods that they agree with that answer.
Okay. Second question on the tax fairness that so sorely needed in this country. The data that you have in regards to the United States and how that's depicted in Washington as a platform, I'm wondering if that data will be showcased to members of Parliament today and to really punctuate exactly the unfairness of what is happening with this tax break.
The U.S. reference point is in our meeting notes and our leave-behind materials for all of today's meetings with MPs. So yes to that part of your answer. And I can tell you that because it's an international game and we do a lot of business across the border and have a lot of relationships, they look at us as if we have two heads on in Canada when they hear about this. The people in the golf industry in the States are very surprised. Hopefully that helps to influence the decisions to make the change here in Canada. Among the many other talking points that we have, the U.S. comparison does count. It is a global world, global business. You got to pay attention to things that do cross the borders.
Right. Operator?
Thanks, Jeff.
Okay. Operator, can you please remind the members on the phone not to use speaker phones while they ask their questions?
Again, if you are using a speakerphone, please lift the handset before pressing any keys. Our next question comes from Curtis Stock from the Edmonton Journal. Please go ahead.
Hi, I'm just wondering if I have this clear that there's the number of golfers over the last 5 years has remained pretty well the same, but there's 10 fewer million rounds being played. Is that correct?
Approximately, yes. Number of players is the same. Number that take up the game and the number that leave the game is pretty much a balanced act. The frequency of their play has declined a little bit, and it's difficult to draw conclusions yet on what that means because if you look at the years since that previous economic impact study, they've been economically weak years generally in the Canadian economy, very slow recovery of recessionary impacts. How that shakes out, if we had a more normal economy, nobody knows. What would the rounds played be? I personally believe it's a fairly strong and robust sport that, with a fair economy behind it, will resume some of the numbers that you're referring to that we had up until the recession.
Were there any provincial comparisons done on that? Like, I was just wondering, particularly Alberta, like where it was as far as number of rounds.
There is. It is in the study. I do not have all those notes right here at the podium, but you can draw that from within the study. All provincial breakouts are there. There is a bit of a tendency where Western Canada's provinces have outperformed Eastern Canada, not that differently than the economics of the country, and that sort of reinforces my point that rounds played do have a relationship to the economy in general.
Operator, we're going to take a question from the floor and come back to you after. Go ahead.
Just a quick housekeeping matter, but I have to ask this question. I know you said you've got multi-party support. I just want to be clear, the association has not or does not contribute. Does it contribute to any political parties at all, or does it have any links?
Great question. Canada's golf associations do not contribute to any of those political parties the way you're asking the question. That's totally irrelevant from our strategy here, but it's a great question to ask, and it's certainly coming from back to the U.S.-Canada comparison, so much more of that occurs down there. Very clean and objective request we're making here in Canada.
Wait, operator, any more people on the phone?
There are currently no further questions. Please proceed.
Clarify some of the numbers.
Michael, clarify a couple of numbers that were asked earlier, and then we'll wrap up.
Well, unfortunately, Tom McGuire couldn't join us.
Can you hear me?
Here you are, Tom.
Yeah, I'm here.
So back to National Post question, which was, sorry?
Wall Street Journal.
I apologize, Wall Street Journal. Tom, I'm going to just lead in it quickly, and then I'll let you take over. Tom couldn't join us today, but he's online, as you hear. So the 19.7 in direct spending is what was spent by the operators and the individual golfers. The impact of that, in terms of value add, is $14.3 billion to the Canadian economy. That's the value add. And then in terms of taxes and so forth, it's $1.4 billion in indirect and property taxes, and then $2.2 billion in provincial and federal. So it's pretty significant. Tom, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, well, I have to say I can't quite recall the question, but I think it was relating to comparing the terms gross production, GDP, and spending. Is that correct?
Yeah, please clarify.
So are you saying that golf accounts for 1% of Canada's GDP?
Yes, yeah. So the GDP is about 1.8 trillion.
That's spending, because the indirect and induced as well are part of that. 14.3
is the suggestion that the golfing industry and all the direct and indirect spin-offs make up basically 1% of all economic activity in Canada?
That's right. It's $14.2 billion in its contribution to GDP through, as you say, all the effects of indirect, direct, and induced related to both the spending that the courses, the operators make in relation to supplying golf, and the spending that golfers make in relation to their participation. Now, so that there's an important distinction there. Some of that spending doesn't occur on course, as you would imagine. Transportation to and from the golf courses, golf-related travel, equipment, and paraphernalia that's purchased at retail outside of golf course, so buying clubs at a sporting store, for example. So all of that taken together contributes $14.2 billion in GDP.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, everybody. Additional questions are welcome to any of our NAGA partners by individual interview.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes your conference call for today. We thank you for participating and ask that you please disconnect your lines.